What if the largest desert on Earth was not always desert? What if beneath the sand lie the ruins of a sophisticated hydraulic civilization that controlled water across an entire continent? What if satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar have revealed massive canal networks, buried cities, and infrastructure that official archaeology refuses to acknowledge because admitting it exists means admitting that advanced civilizations have fallen catastrophically and recently enough that the evidence is still preserved beneath hundreds of feet of sand? The Sahara Desert covers more than 3.5 million square miles. It is one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. Vast emptiness. Endless dunes. Temperatures that kill. No water. No life. Nothing but sand stretching to every horizon. We are taught this desert has existed in essentially its current form for thousands of years. That North Africa has been arid wasteland since deep prehistory. That no significant civilization could have thrived here because the environment could not support it. But when you look at the Sahara from space, when you use satellite imaging that penetrates sand to reveal what lies beneath, when you examine ground-penetrating radar surveys and geological core samples, a completely different picture emerges. Beneath the sand are structures, cities, roads, and most tellingly, an extensive network of canals and aqueducts requiring engineering sophistication that should not exist in a region officially described as primitive tribal territory before Arab and European contact. These are not natural formations. These are not seasonal wadis or ancient riverbeds. These are engineered channels. Built canals with precise gradients. Aqueduct systems with calculated flow rates. Water management infrastructure on a continental scale. And they are buried not by millennia of gradual accumulation but by catastrophic sand deposition that happened rapidly, violently, burying an entire civilization so completely that for centuries no one even knew it had existed. This is not speculation. This is documented evidence. Satellite archaeology has mapped the structures. Ground surveys have confirmed them. Ancient texts reference the cities. Maps from the Roman period show rivers, lakes, and settlements in locations that are now empty desert. The evidence exists. And it proves that the official timeline is a lie. The Sahara was not always desert. It was green, populated, and home to a civilization so advanced that its water engineering rivals or exceeds anything attributed to Rome, yet this empire has been systematically erased from history. Let us begin with what satellites have revealed, because this evidence is the hardest to dismiss. Since the 1980s, various satellite imaging projects have been mapping the Sahara using different wavelengths and penetration technologies. Standard visible light imaging shows only sand. But radar imaging, infrared scanning, and multispectral analysis can penetrate the surface, revealing buried structures beneath. The first major discovery came when NASA's shuttle imaging radar captured images of what appeared to be ancient river channels beneath the eastern Sahara. These were not random formations. They showed clear meandering patterns, tributary systems, and delta formations characteristic of managed waterways. Further analysis revealed that many of these channels were too straight, too regular, and too precisely aligned to be natural. They were canals. Built canals, hundreds of miles long, connecting what appeared to be urban centers now completely buried under sand. Subsequent surveys expanded the discoveries. European Space Agency imaging in the 1990s revealed geometric patterns across vast areas of the Central Sahara. Rectangular structures arranged in grid layouts. Radial patterns extending from central points. Linear features running for dozens of miles in perfectly straight lines. These are not geological formations. These are cities. Roads. Irrigation networks. The signatures of coordinated urban planning on a scale that should require industrial civilization. Even more revealing are the canal systems. Ground-penetrating radar has traced networks of channels extending across the Sahara from the Atlas Mountains in the north to regions that are now Chad and Niger in the south. These channels show engineered gradients, meaning they were designed to move water downhill at controlled rates. They show branching patterns that distributed water to multiple destinations. And they show reservoir structures, large depressions that would have stored water and regulated flow. The engineering precision is extraordinary. The gradient calculations alone require advanced surveying capabilities. To build a canal hundreds of miles long that maintains a consistent downhill slope requires the ability to measure elevation across vast distances with accuracy. Roman engineers could do this. But according to official history, no comparable civilization existed in North Africa. The indigenous peoples are described as pastoral nomads, tribal societies without the organization or technology to undertake such projects. Yet the infrastructure exists. Someone built it. And whoever they were, they possessed capabilities that the official timeline does not account for. The scale is also telling. These are not local irrigation projects serving individual settlements. These are continental-scale water management systems. Canals connecting regions separated by hundreds of miles. Aqueducts that would have required decades of coordinated labor and massive resource investment. The level of social organization necessary to build and maintain such infrastructure implies a unified political entity, a government, or empire that controlled vast territories and could mobilize populations for massive public works projects. Now we must ask when this infrastructure was built, and more importantly, when it was buried. Official archaeology, on the rare occasions it acknowledges these structures at all, places them in deep antiquity. 5,000 years ago or more, during the so-called Green Sahara period when the region supposedly had higher rainfall and could support agriculture. But this dating is based on assumptions, not evidence. The assumption is that the Sahara turned to desert gradually over millennia, so any infrastructure must be extremely old to have been built before desertification. But geological evidence contradicts gradual desertification. Core samples from Saharan lake beds show abrupt transitions. Layers of organic sediment indicating lush vegetation end suddenly, replaced by sand and dust. No gradual transition. No slow drying over centuries. Rapid collapse. The environment shifted from fertile to desert in what geological terms would call an instant, decades, not millennia. And when this shift occurred, it buried everything. The condition of the buried structures also suggests recent burial. Satellite imaging reveals that many features are remarkably well preserved. Walls still standing. Streets still visible. Canal channels still intact. If these structures had been exposed to erosion for thousands of years before burial, they would show far more degradation. Instead, they appear to have been rapidly covered, protected from weathering by the sand that buried them. This is consistent with catastrophic burial, not gradual accumulation over millennia. Ancient maps provide additional evidence. Roman maps of North Africa, based on even older sources, show rivers and lakes in regions that are now barren desert. The maps depict cities and settlements in locations where satellite imaging has revealed buried structures. Either the Romans invented an entire imaginary geography, or they were mapping real features that existed during their time. If the latter, then the desertification of the Sahara occurred after the Roman period. Not 5,000 years ago. Perhaps as recently as 1,500 to 2,000 years ago. Or even more recently if the maps were based on information preserved from an earlier era. Arab chronicles from the medieval period also reference Saharan cities and fertile regions. Descriptions of trade routes crossing areas now impassable. Accounts of cities that thrived on agriculture and commerce in places now empty of all life. These texts are dismissed as exaggerations or misidentifications. But if the buried infrastructure is real, if satellite imaging confirms cities in the locations described, then the Arab chroniclers were documenting reality. They were writing about a world that still existed in their time, or had only recently vanished. The catastrophic nature of the environmental collapse is critical to understanding what happened. If desertification occurred gradually over thousands of years, populations would have migrated slowly, abandoning settlements as conditions worsened, leaving little infrastructure behind. But if the change was rapid and catastrophic, if fertile land turned to uninhabitable desert within a generation, then populations would have had no time to evacuate, infrastructure would have been abandoned in place, and entire cities would have been buried where they stood. Evidence suggests the latter. Buried settlements show signs of sudden abandonment. Structures left intact. Artifacts in place. No gradual decline or systematic dismantling. The inhabitants left quickly, taking only what they could carry, and never returned. This is the pattern of catastrophic abandonment, not slow migration. Something sudden and devastating occurred that made the region uninhabitable so rapidly that an entire civilization collapsed before it could adapt. Climate science acknowledges that the Sahara has undergone rapid climate shifts, but it places these shifts in distant prehistory to avoid implications about recent catastrophic change. The Green Sahara period is safely dated to 5,000 to 11,000 years ago, well before recorded history, allowing the region's transformation to be treated as ancient natural process rather than recent catastrophe with implications for our understanding of civilization's fragility. But the infrastructure, the preservation, the ancient maps, and the texts all point to a more recent collapse. And if the Saharan civilization fell recently, if it was erased by rapid environmental catastrophe that turned the continent from garden to wasteland within decades, then the same forces could strike again. Our civilizations could fall just as completely. And that is a truth institutions cannot allow populations to contemplate. Now we must examine the engineering of the canal systems more closely, because this is where the evidence of advanced capability becomes undeniable. Water engineering is precise science. Building functional aqueducts and canals requires accurate surveying, mathematical calculation, and understanding of fluid dynamics. The structures beneath the Sahara demonstrate all of this. The gradient control is perhaps most impressive. For water to flow through a canal without pumping, the channel must slope downhill consistently. Too steep and the flow erodes the channel. Too shallow and water stagnates. The optimal gradient depends on distance, volume, and channel material. Roman engineers understood this and built aqueducts that maintained precise gradients over dozens of miles. The Saharan canals show comparable precision over even greater distances. This is not primitive irrigation. This is sophisticated hydraulic engineering. The branching networks show equally advanced understanding. A single canal feeds multiple smaller channels, distributing water to different destinations. The junctions are positioned to ensure adequate flow to all branches. Reservoir structures regulate pressure and store surplus water. This is systematic water management on a scale that requires centralized planning and technical expertise. Someone designed this network as an integrated system, not a collection of isolated local projects. Material evidence, though limited by the difficulty of accessing buried structures, also indicates advanced construction. Where excavations have been possible, canal walls show evidence of stone lining, preventing erosion and seepage. Some sections used a form of hydraulic cement, a waterproof material that sets even when submerged. This technology is attributed to Romans but appears in Saharan structures that official chronology claims predate Roman contact with the region. Either the technology is older than acknowledged, or the Saharan civilization existed more recently and had contact with or developed independently the same advanced methods. The positioning of the infrastructure also reveals geographic knowledge. The canal networks exploit natural aquifers and underground water sources. Channels are routed to maximize downhill flow from mountainous regions to lower basins. Reservoir sites are positioned at locations with naturally water-attaining geology. This level of geographic understanding requires extensive surveying, geological knowledge, and possibly even mapping from elevated perspectives or aerial observation. Some researchers have suggested that the geometric precision visible in satellite imaging, the perfectly straight lines extending for miles, the radial patterns around urban centers, implies the use of surveying tools and techniques comparable to modern theodolites or even aerial navigation. How else could ancient engineers achieve such precision across distances where the destination is beyond visual range? Either they had advanced tools we do not acknowledge, or they had knowledge systems for large-scale surveying that have been lost. The urban planning visible in buried cities also suggests sophistication. Grid layouts with streets intersecting at right angles. Central plazas or complexes surrounded by regular blocks of structures. Defensive walls positioned to exploit terrain. Water distribution systems integrated into city design. These are not ad hoc settlements that grew organically. These are planned cities, designed before construction, built according to coordinated plans. This level of urban organization is attributed to civilizations like Rome, Greece, and China. Yet here it is, buried beneath the Sahara, in a region where official history claims no such civilization existed. Now we must confront the suppression, because the evidence is too extensive, too well documented, too visible in satellite imaging for mainstream archaeology to be unaware. Yet it is systematically ignored. Textbooks do not mention the Saharan Canal networks. Academic conferences do not discuss the buried cities. Documentaries about ancient civilizations ignore the largest concentration of ancient infrastructure on the African continent. Why? Because acknowledging it requires rewriting the narrative. If a sophisticated civilization existed in North Africa, if it controlled water across an entire continent, if it built cities and infrastructure matching or exceeding Roman capability, then the story of African development changes completely. The narrative that advanced civilization came to Africa through Mediterranean or Middle Eastern contact collapses. Africa becomes not a recipient of civilization but an independent source of it. And that threatens the entire structure of how history is taught, how cultural hierarchies are justified, how colonial narratives are maintained. Even more threatening is the timeline. If this civilization existed recently enough that rapid environmental change destroyed it, if the desertification happened within historical or near historical time, then civilization is far more fragile than we are taught. Advanced cultures with sophisticated technology can be completely erased by environmental catastrophe. And that means it could happen again. To us. Our cities could be buried. Our infrastructure could be destroyed. Our civilizations could fall into oblivion within a generation, leaving future archaeologists to puzzle over ruins they cannot explain. This is the knowledge that must be suppressed. Not just the existence of the Saharan civilization, but what its fall demonstrates about the vulnerability of all civilizations to rapid environmental change. So the evidence is ignored. The satellite imaging is not discussed. The structures are left buried. And the official narrative maintains that the Sahara has been desert for thousands of years, that no significant civilization existed there, and that what we see in the sand beneath our feet is the pinnacle of human achievement, not a diminished remnant of what came before. But suppression cannot erase evidence that exists in the physical world. Satellites continue to image. Radar continues to penetrate. And researchers continue to map what lies beneath the sand. The data accumulates. The patterns become clearer. And slowly, despite institutional resistance, the truth emerges. Beneath the Sahara lies an empire. A hydraulic civilization that managed water on a continental scale. And it fell not in deep prehistory but recently enough that its infrastructure is still intact, waiting beneath the sand for the generation that will finally acknowledge what it proves. When we connect the Saharan evidence to other global patterns, the picture becomes even more disturbing. The canal networks, the urban planning, the engineering precision, these match architectural and infrastructural signatures found worldwide. The same geometric city layouts appear in ruins attributed to completely different, unconnected civilizations. The same sophisticated water management appears in aqueducts on every continent. The same advanced surveying and construction techniques show up in structures that official history assigns to cultures with no contact. This global consistency suggests not multiple independent developments, but a single source. A global civilization that spanned continents, that controlled water and resources on a planetary scale, and that built infrastructure using standardized methods and coordinated planning. The Saharan structures are not isolated anomalies. They are part of a worldwide network. And when that network fell, when the global civilization collapsed, regions like North Africa suffered environmental catastrophes that turned them from gardens to deserts, burying all evidence beneath sand and ensuring that survivors had no way to maintain or even understand what had been built. The rapid desertification itself may have been triggered by the collapse. If the hydraulic infrastructure maintained regional climate through water distribution, if the canal networks supported agriculture that in turn supported rainfall cycles, then the destruction of the infrastructure could have triggered runaway environmental collapse. Remove the water management, vegetation dies, soil erodes, desert advances. Within decades, fertile land becomes wasteland. And once the process starts, it cannot be reversed without the very infrastructure that was destroyed. The civilization that controlled water created its own doom when it fell, because the environment depended on active management to remain habitable. This makes the Sahara not just evidence of a lost civilization but a warning. A demonstration of what happens when advanced infrastructure fails. When systems that maintain habitability collapse. When civilizations that depend on technology lose the ability to maintain that technology. The desert is not natural. It is the scar left by catastrophic failure. And it shows us what our future could be if we suffer similar collapse. Our cities could become deserts. Our infrastructure could be buried. Our descendants could wander ruins they cannot comprehend, having lost the knowledge to maintain what we built. Ancient texts hint at this interpretation. References to North African gardens of paradise that were lost when the water ceased to flow. Descriptions of cities that vanished beneath the sands when the gods withdrew their blessing. These are not mere mythology. They are cultural memory of environmental collapse caused by the failure of hydraulic systems. The water stopped flowing not because gods withdrew favor but because the infrastructure that controlled it was destroyed. And without water, the gardens became desert. The speed of collapse visible in geological evidence supports this. Organic layers ending abruptly. Pollen records showing sudden shift from diverse vegetation to only desert-adapted plants. Lake beds drying completely within decades. This is not gradual climate change. This is system failure. And it happened fast enough that populations could not adapt, fast enough that cities were abandoned, fast enough that knowledge was lost before it could be transmitted. We live on a planet marked by the scars of collapsed civilizations. The Sahara is one. Antarctica, now frozen, may be another. Ocean floors may hide cities submerged by rising seas or sinking continents. Every desert, every wasteland, every empty expanse may have been something else before catastrophe transformed it. The evidence is there, beneath sand, beneath ice, beneath water. And the message is consistent. Civilizations rise. They build. They seem permanent. And then they fall so completely that future generations forget they existed. The Saharan canals are a message from the past. They tell us that water is life. That infrastructure maintains habitability. That collapse happens rapidly. That environments we consider natural may be recent creations of catastrophe. And that the sand covering the ruins of one civilization could someday cover the ruins of our own. We have examined the satellite evidence. We have traced the canal networks. We have seen the buried cities. We have recognized the engineering sophistication. We have confronted the suppression. And we have understood the implications. Beneath the Sahara lies proof that advanced civilization existed where we are taught only primitives lived. That catastrophic environmental collapse can erase sophisticated cultures within decades. And that the official timeline is constructed to hide this truth, to maintain the illusion of linear progress, to prevent us from recognizing that we are not the first to achieve what we have achieved, and that we may not be the last to lose everything just as completely as those who came before. The desert is not empty. It is full of evidence. Evidence that challenges every comfortable assumption about history, about progress, about the permanence of civilization. Evidence that institutions refuse to acknowledge because doing so would mean admitting that everything we take for granted could vanish as thoroughly as the Saharan Empire vanished beneath the sand. But the evidence exists. In the satellite images. In the ground-penetrating radar. In the ancient maps and texts. In the structures that lie waiting beneath the surface. And no amount of institutional suppression can erase what the sand has preserved. The buried canals remain, testament to what was lost and warning of what could be lost again.